And now it's time for a Firstpost exclusive. India's presidency has set the tone for next year. Brazil will take over as the next G20 president tomorrow. And just a short while back, we sat down with the president of Brazil, Lula Da Silva. He hailed India's G20 agenda. He said, India is teaching us a new way of people's participation in diplomacy. President Lula said, the Delhi Declaration shows that India will always be a power. He spoke his mind on the war in Ukraine, about Chinese President Xi Jinping's absence, whether Putin will attend next year's G20 summit in Brazil, and Indian movies. He happens to be a fan. Here's an excerpt from the conversation. Hello and welcome to this very special interview. With me is the President of Brazil, Mr. Lula Da Silva. President Da Silva, welcome to Firstpost.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here talking with the Indian TV viewer, and I hope that we're going to have a great interview.
We look forward to it, Mr. President. How's your visit to New Delhi going so far, and how has the first day of the G20 summit been for you?
Well, actually, this G20 is a G20 that is exceptionally very well organized. We had, I would say, a lot of work. I arrived last night, and today we had 2 sessions that were hard work, and we had some other parallel events that were also very important. We launched a commitment together with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, with Argentina, with Indonesia, a commitment to follow a biofuel policy that is very strong so that we can fight the greenhouse gas effect, so that we can diminish the use of oil and try to use biofuel. So that was very important, this initiative, this commitment that was assumed by all the presidents that participated together with Prime Minister Modi. And so I am convinced that we will come out of this meeting with some guidelines where the countries will, what would they have to do from here onwards, so that we can diminish the inequality between the peoples, inequality amongst the countries, so that the world could live in a better way, and above all, so that we can confront the climate issue with great responsibility. It's not a joke what's happening on with the climate change around the world. If someone still has doubts that the climate, nothing will happen with the climate, I can reassure you that the most certain thing that exists today is that we are lacking with responsibility when we deal with the climate change, and we're being the victim of the lack of attention of humanity. The rulers lacked responsibility in dealing in an effective way to avoid that the planet will warm up, that we will lose control of these floods, and there's nothing to do. We still have time. We have to take care of the planet. I believe that this meeting will give a very good guideline to all countries so that we can manage to put in practice a good policy so that we can take care with great care of our planet Earth, of their forests, of its water, so that we can live well.
Mr. President, it's very, very good to see a world leader like you speak so passionately about climate, and we hope to see more leaders put it at the center of their policy making. I understand that India has been also pushing for climate action that is just, that does justice to the whole world, developing and developed. We've had some 200 meetings over the past few months in 60 Indian cities. What do you make of the progress that has been made so far, and what do you make of India's agenda?
I think it was an extraordinary, the India agenda that they developed, and the promotion of 60 debates or more in different cities. In Brazil, many ministers came to these meetings. We had the health minister, we had the mines and energy minister from Brazil, we had the science and technology minister, the enormous amount, the labor minister came here, and the finance minister came to these meetings. So these hundreds of meetings that you involving thousands of people is a new way that India is teaching to us that it's not sufficient for the presidents of the countries to participate. It's necessary for us to involve the government as a whole, and that we should involve the people that should participate in the debate. We learned a lot. And since we're going to host next year the G20 in Brazil, we will take from India many teachings, and so that we can have a G20 meeting as productive as we had here in India.
One of the big headlines today is the Delhi Declaration. We understand that there is finally consensus. We've seen the draft of the declaration and all leaders have agreed. There was a fear that the war in Ukraine might hijack the agenda. And in the statements that followed since, it was said that Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia helped forge consensus. Can you tell us a little more about the conversation that went in and how did Brazil contribute?
Well, the G20 is a forum that was built because of the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. From there onwards, the G20 started to discuss many economic issues, and the Bretton Woods institutions were also started to be discussed, the World Bank, the IMF, in an attempt to try to improve the functioning of these multilateral institute. That's why we didn't want here in India, we would discuss the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is not the appropriate forum for that. On the 19th of September of this month, we will have the General Assembly of the UN, and that's the place for us to discuss the war. That's the place for us to try to discuss peace. That's the place for us to call Putin and Zelensky in a negotiation table, and because no one wants war. Everybody is against war. We want peace. So it's necessary for us to establish a conversation policy so that we can try to convince the two presidents for Russia and Ukraine that the war is not the solution for anything, and that the dialogue, the diplomacy, and a table of dialogue could help much more. From the beginning, Brazil has been saying that we do not want to participate in the war efforts. Brazil wants to participate in the peace effort. We want to try to negotiate, as also India thinks like that, China thinks like that, many other countries think like Brazil, and so that's why we believe that it's very important so that the war issue should not be included in the document, in the declaration from the G20. That's very important. Otherwise, people go to war and then we lose and waste time instead of discussing the problems that involve 9 billion inhabitants, the hunger that is affecting 735 million people, unemployment of millions of people, and we stay here discussing something that is not our top priority. And so I believe that it was very important, the decision that was made not to allow that the war would come into our declaration. The declaration is very serious-minded. It's a mandatory reading for all of us that participated in the G20, and I hope that it serves as a guideline, as a roadmap, so that we can, in Rio next year, to do something even better. Now we have to start to go to actual policies. Now we're going to go to a phase that G20 doesn't have to stay anymore just discussing and philosophy. And no, we have to take commitments to make things change, to do things. The climate change issue is very serious-minded. We have to do something about it. And Brazil is taking the commitment of reaching 2030 with zero deforestation. And we have already ended hunger in Brazil once in the past. And now we have 33 million that are in hunger once again. And so we're going to end the hunger in Brazil again. And to end with hunger in Brazil, we have to create jobs. The economy has to grow. The poor has to come into the national budget of the different countries. When the government starts building its budget to know how much money the government is going to spend, they have to include the poor in that budget, in government spending. The poor has to be included in the government budget because no one wants to include the poor. Now, in the moment that you put the poor in the budget, you start to diminish the poverty, because you know what happens when the poor receives a benefit. He receives a benefit, and he's not going to buy dollar. He's not going to keep that money. He's going to buy things. He's going to buy new clothes for his children. He's going to buy school material for the kids. So that means that the wheel of the economy starts working. And this is what we're going to have to do from here onwards. We're going to have to make the economy move forward so that we can end with the inequality and with hunger in the planet Earth.
Would you say this consensus, in a way, is a win for New Delhi, and it establishes India as a bridging power in an increasingly divided world?
India will always be a power. It is a country that has a tremendous 1,000-year culture. It's a country that was already colonized, a country that managed to get its independence with the most extraordinary figure after Christ, which is Mahatma Gandhi. It's a country that has 1,400,000,000 inhabitants. It's a country that is the 6th largest economy of the world, a country that managed to build a cheap rocket and reach a part of the moon that not even the Russians managed, and the Americans managed to go to that part of the moon. So what happened here was the result of the competence of organization of the G20 that India organized as the host country. India is always a country that you have to take it very seriously, very respected country, and I will always say that because we came here and we established a strategic partnership between Brazil and India, and this partnership now needs to be improved so that the trade flow, foreign trade flow between Brazil and India should be the size of India and the size of Brazil. It should be very big because we can do that. So we have the conditions to do. So what happened here was a victory of the organization and of the respectability that we all have for India.
At the BRICS summit, there was a picture of you along with the Indian Prime Minister that went viral. You were looking at a newspaper, and we were all very curious to know what was the conversation that you were having at that time.
I was congratulating the Prime Minister Modi for the conquest of reaching the space with a rocket, cheap rocket, and to manage to reach a place where 4 days before that, the Russians failed to reach the moon. So I think it was an extraordinary achievement with science and technology for India. So I was congratulating the Prime Minister, and he was very proud of the achievement.
And my final question, a lot of people have seen you making speeches at global forums. We've heard about your views on politics, your views on climate change, economy, but not many people know that you also watch movies from India. Do you want to tell our audience about the movie that you liked?
Yes. The last film that I watched from India is a film called Revolt, Rebellion, and Revolution. RRR. It's a 3-hour feature film, and it has very funny scenes. There is beautiful dance in the film, and there is a critique, a deep critique to the British control over India and conquering India. Sincerely, I believe that this film should have been a box office here in India, and I believe that it should be making success around the world, because everybody that talks to me, the first thing that I say is, have you watched the 3R film? Revolt, Rebellion, and Revolution. And so many times we see that the Indian film, and people don't even know that India has good movies, a good movie industry. Many times people are not aware of that movie industry, that they have good films from India. So sincerely, I enjoyed very much this film from India. The political side, I enjoyed also the dance, the joy that was shown in the film, even when the critique is done in a very humor. The critique is perfect, even using humor. So I congratulate to the directors of this film, to the artists, because it enchanted me.